welcome
Hey,
to It's on AI, where we walk you through AI Lab step by step. I'm Annie, this is Momo.
and Amaya.
Yeah, and today we're going to talk about vibe coding with Gemini CLI. And this is, as always, it's a two-part series. And in today's episode, we're going to walk you through everything about get to know what is Gemini CLI, how to use Gemini CLI, and how to using MCP server, and also extension with Gemini CLI. And the next episode, we're going to introduce IO. What we're going to introduce next episode.
So next episode, we're going to learn how can we do things such as agent skills. How can we use things like hooks in Gemini CLI to control behavior, add guardrails? So a lot we're going to be covering. We're going to be deploying an agent to the cloud and doing a boss fight as always. So stay tuned. We have a lot to cover, but it's going to be pretty fun.
As always, we're going to claim our credit at the very beginning, and then we will go to our lab. So Io, why don't you walk us through our equipment check and also claim our credit?
Sure, let me do so. And it's going to look something like this. So all you have to do is click continue. Make sure that you're selecting the Gmail account that you want to use. We always recommend that you don't use a corporate account or an EDU account. Oftentimes those come with restrictions. So later on, as you're progressing through the lab, you may run into blockers. So we always recommend that you use a personal Gmail account that you have, full control over. So all you have to do is select the one that you want to use. Click here to access your credits. And you're going to see your first name, your last name, coupon code. Just scroll to the bottom and say accept and continue. And then that will add about $5 worth of credits to your account. So essentially, we want to make sure that you have no charge to yourself. So again, to go through this lab, it's free. We're going to be calling Gemini behind the scenes models like Nano Banana. But as long as you're using these free credits, essentially you're good to go. And that's pretty much it. Later on, we're going to kind of walk through how you link it to a project, but Annie's going to walk us through that now.
All right, as you can see on the screen, this is a lab we're going to walk you through today. It's called Shadow Blade. And we're going to learn in this lab. You can take a look at this diagram. And this is, in this lab, you're going to learn how to use Gemini CLI. Our agent is actually an agent tool in Terminal to help you vibe coding stuff. And we're going to walk you through what is Gemini, how to use that in today's lab. And we're going to learn, as you can see here, like how do you connect MCP server with settings JSON file? How do you connect with different extension? How do you create skills with Gemini CLI to eventually create an ADK agent? How do you leverage memory at user level and project level to give more context for your web coding project? How to write design doc to better web coding stuff? And also, we're not only going to cover how to vibe coding stuff, you're going to learn how to evaluate them, writing tests, and put a test to the CI/CD and deploy them. So this is
all day two. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. What did you say?
I said that's going to be day two. So,
yeah.
The CI/CD, the deployment. So you want to stick around for both days.
Yes. So if you want to learn, so for today's lab, we're going to learn how to do MCP server and extension. And next episode, we're going to learn how to do skills and we're going to all the way to the extension, how do you do hook, and also all the way to the pipeline. So making sure you're coming back for next episode, okay? Io?
Yeah. Let's get started. Okay, so where do we want to kick off today? Yeah.
All right, let's continue. So first, we need to prepare the training ground. And just like Io mentioned before, he lead you to claim your Google Cloud credit so that you do not have to do this. And next is we need to activate our Cloud Shell environment in Google Cloud Console. To open Google Cloud Console, you can just search Google Cloud Console in Google, or you can type this console.cloud.google.com. And once you open it, on the top right, just click this Activate Cloud Shell button. So you will have this Cloud Shell open. So I usually like just to click this, open in a new window. So in the open in the new window, I'm able to open this editor and terminal at the same time. This looks very, very like VS Code, right? So it's like VS Code on cloud.
Yeah, it's essentially a remote VM that's managed by Google. So it's persistent. You can develop within it, create code files, come back to it a week later, a month later. The files will still be there. So it's a really good development environment for anything you're building in Google Cloud. We always recommend it for development. Of course, People have their own tools that they like to use, but Cloud Shell is a really good place to start off with.
Yeah. And once we have this open, let's all get our authenticated. So just the first copy this G-Cloud auth list. So making sure that you authenticate with your Gmail account. So here, making sure that you're signing use the same Gmail account that claimed the credit earlier, right? So if it's not the same, making sure you do G-Cloud config set account and put your Gmail here to set it to the same Gmail account. And once we have that, we need to clone our project. Just copy this and paste it here. Yeah, notice that we're clone 2 project over here, right? So I assume that we're working at this developer folder, and we have this dungeon. Like, what is this one about?
Yeah, great question. So for the agent versus developer folder, for those of you that have followed us, the last couple of weeks, essentially that has all the starter files and templates that we're going to use. So you as a developer, you don't have to start from scratch. So when you're building your agent, essentially there's a lot of starter code, like the imports that you don't have to worry about. So you can just focus on the most critical parts. And for the agent versus dungeon, that essentially is the container image for our boss. So at the very end of the lab, we're going to be doing a boss fight in the cloud, where the agent that we're going to build in the lab is going to fight some sort of monster that's also an agent, and they're going to be communicating via A2A. And essentially, before we get to that point, we're going to go ahead and deploy that dungeon ahead of time. So by the time we get to it, it's up and running.
Yeah, so we will eventually deploy this dungeon agent and then talk to it through A2A. And next, let's create our project. So I will just go ahead, copy this and paste it over here. So you can see that it's trying to create this project, start with agentverse-shadow. And yeah, you will have probably a different name over here, but usually start with agentverse-shadow. So what it does behind the scene is it will first create a project for you, and then it will link the building account you just created to this project so that you have this project working. As you can see now, it's trying to install the dependency and checking the building status and configure it. So now you can see that we have this yellow font. So that means you have successfully created this project and this, and also you're pointing to this project. And next one, as always, I think we don't need to do this step, but we just do this step just in case that, you don't have the project configured, right?
Yeah, exactly. All we're doing at that step is configuring it, the project within G-Cloud. But at this point, it should already be there. But if it's not, you can go ahead and run that command.
Yeah. And next is let's enable our Google Cloud APIs. Because, in this project that you want to create our artifact registry, you want to deploy things with Cloud Build, like you want to build things and deploy things, and you want to use API. So first you need to enable those related API, and then so that you can eventually use them. Yeah, I would anything to add for any API you want to anything interesting to you?
Yeah, one question I always get is when you enable an API in a project, do you start getting billed for it? And the answer is no. So just because you enable an API doesn't mean you're going to get billed for it. Essentially, it's just making it available for use. If you don't enable it, then you won't be able to use things like Cloud Run, for example, or Artifact Registry. So it's just essentially turning on the switch. So it could be available for use. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And next one is we need to create our artifact registry repository. So my understanding is, once we want to deploy our agent, want to containerize it, we want to have an image and put it to a container and host it on the cloud. So here we want to have this container ready on the cloud so that later on we can deploy our image to it. Does that sound right to you, Ayo? Or anything what's your opinion of creating this artifact registry here?
Yeah, so essentially Artifact Registry is essentially Google Cloud's, Docker Hub. So if you want to deploy an agent to Cloud Run, you have to have it containerized, as Annie mentioned, and so you have to host that image somewhere. So you have to kind of host it in a Artifact Registry repository. But for you to do that, you have to have one that exists. So pretty much all we're doing at this step is creating an empty repository. So later on, when we deploy the image, it's kind of coming from some sort of host location.
Yep, and I'm just copy this and waiting. Okay, now it's ready. I just paste it over here. So to verify this created successfully, what we can do is we can like open Google Cloud Console, click this. So now we are opening our console, and we can just directly search our artifact registry. Over here in the search bar, just search this, and you can see the first one is the one we want to find. And here on the top left, making sure you select the project we created for you. So once you select, under All tab, you will see this project start with Agentverse Shadow. So once we click that, you can see we have this Agentverse repo that's created for you. So later on, you will able to contain, like host the image. And we have this done. And next step is setting up the permission. And here we're using the same service account to like making sure grant them relay permission, so that later on you can like using those services. So basically it's like a robot account of you, so that it grant the account grant this permission, so that you are able to modify the artifact registry or like edit the cloud build and more. I also noticed that they're like the same service account. I don't think it's a good practice for production use, right? Because I usually want to have like a different service account for different role.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, we always recommend when it comes to production, separation of principles. So you have some service accounts that have certain roles, other service accounts that have other roles. So you may have one service account that's meant to be an AI model caller. So you might give it the AI platform user role, but another service account is only meant to build images. So you would only give it one role for, Cloud Builds Editor. For our lab purpose, we're just trying to be general purpose and just, kind of be a little bit quicker. We're creating one service account that has all the roles, but we always recommend separating it out in production.
Yeah. And the last step we want to do is first we want to deploy our dungeon, so that later on we can connect to this agent through A2A. And also we want to install our Gemini CLI. So in our Cloud Shell by default, you should have this Gemini CLI installed. So we have this just to making sure it's updated.
And to that point, Annie, people have asked me before, this Gemini CLI, is it a free service or does it have a cost? Like, how would you answer that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think to use Gemini CLI it's free. If you open the Gemini CLI doc, you simply just need this one line command to use Gemini CLI. However, if you have like a free account, you can only use in 2.5, I believe. But if you have a paid account, you can try use Gemini 3 over here. And also you have some limitation if you have a free account. But it's to install Gemini CLI and get started with 2.5 model. It's for free. Anything to add?
No, yeah, that's a great answer.
Yeah. All right, so this is what Gemini CLI look like, and this is what we're gonna talk about today. Like we're gonna talk about how to code with Gemini CLI, how to add extension, how to add tools, how to add skills and hook and more. Everything you need to know.
Awesome.
So today and next episode.
I'm excited, but yeah, I just love to also, I know for asking so many questions, but like, I know when it comes to like vibe coding nowadays, Gemini CLI, anti-gravity, these are names that you might hear a lot. Like, how would you differentiate Gemini CLI from something like anti-gravity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Gemini CLI, you can see that this is like a terminal coding agent that you can just directly code it in the terminal. So for anti-gravity, this is like an IDE based. You have this IDE, and then let me see, do I have the example on the page? So it's an agent first experience, and on the IDE you have your code and also have the agent manager. So in the agent manager, you can ask questions, and it can creating the plan for you. You can directly modify the plan that's created for you and add it like to coding and creating and do more. Anything to add, Io? Like how do you usually use anti-gravity or like Gemini CLI, or which one you prefer?
No, that was a great breakdown. I would say they both have their own kind of pros and kind of use cases where for Gemini CLI, obviously use it in the terminal. I like to use it for use cases where I'm just doing like a quick either file search or I want to do, just quick level summary across a folder. For anti-gravity, I like to use it more for kind of complex development workflows, just because I like to kind of see my files more visually in the IDE. But everyone has their own kind of, style and how they like to develop. Yeah.
Yeah, I also use Gemini CLI in anti-gravity terminal as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So waiting for the deployment. So before we talk about, we want to play around Gemini CLI, let's give you a quick walkthrough of, what we're going to learn for next section. So as I mentioned before, Gemini CLI is accessible too, and we are walk through what are Gemini CLI and the difference between other AI tools like anti-gravity. So for today, when we do the Gemini CLI, we want to use it really like vibe coding to the right thing. Like we really want Gemini CLI to work as you want, right? Oftentimes, I'm not sure, Io, does that happen to you that when you're vibe coding, it's oftentimes that very hard to predict, like control the output. And sometimes AI just like modify the wrong file, or like it's like modify too many files and it's hard for you to revert back. It's like kind of annoying, right? I'm not sure, does that happen to you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there's various reasons why this happens. Is, first of all, these models behind the scenes, they're stochastic. So there is some random processes behind how these models output. And two, vibe coding it's an art. It's a skill. You have to kind of learn, how do you manage context? How do you provide instructions and skills? And this is something that you learn over time. And we're going to learn a lot of these skills as part of this lab. But it's absolutely something that kind of takes a little bit of practice. You can't just allow agents to to the most part, you get pretty far and you just allow an agent to write code, but you have to kind of really monitor it and know how do you kind of constrain its development a little bit.
Yeah, let's learn the art. I really like the word art you pick. So to master the art of vibe coding, so first, be smart about the model you're picking with Gemini CLI. If you're using Gemini CLI to coding, like you can pick the model you want. Like if you want to be fast, you can use a Flash model. And if you want to do the reasoning really well, you can do the Pro model. And then next, we're going to learn how to really control the context, the memory for our Gemini CLI coding tool. Basically, if your Gemini CLI has different memory, you will have a different context, and then you will coding correspondingly different, right? So when I see the memory, I saw that we have this project layer, this context, and also user layer context. What is the difference between the project level and user level?
Yeah, great question. And this is something that we're actually going to kind of practice, hands-on later on in this lab. When we talk about project level, Gemini MD or definitions versus user level, for anything that you want to apply globally across all your instances of Gemini CLI, like no matter what terminal folder that you're in, you want that to be at the user level. So these are like user level context, user level definitions, where no matter where you spin up Gemini CLI, it's going to have access to that context. But sometimes, as you may know, you may be working across different projects. Some projects may be about one language in a different language. Another project may be about a different subject altogether. You may want to have project specific definitions and context. Then you would use the project level, Gemini.md and skill.md, where you define these files just at that folder level, and it's only going to apply only to that folder.
Yeah, so we have this Gemini.md file to contain the context at project level and user level. And also we have the skill.md file, basically how we can add skill to project and user, which we're going to cover in next episode, how to add skill. And then we also have like how to add different tools in settings.json file, like hook. If you're curious about, okay, what is hooks? Never heard about hooks. You can also making sure to come back for next episode, and we're going to talk about what is Gemini CLI hooks. But in today's episode, we're going to talk about Gemini.md file, how to smartly manage context and tools to better generate the result we want, like master the art of vibe coding for today. Great. Okay. Cool. So now I think we're ready to continue. You just deploy the agent, and let's start. I'm at step 4. So first, I'm going to create this tabletop folder and come into this folder to coding. So everything we are coding right now, it's going to under this tabletop folder under Agentverse developer. And next, I'm just gonna open the Gemini. So all you need to do is type Gemini. So here I have this clear at the same time because I want to clear the terminal window so that it's more clean. But basically to enable Gemini, it just open Gemini. And now if you first time opening this in Cloud Shell, it will ask you, do you trust the files in this folder? I will trust or like Agentverse developer because, this is our workplace. And now you can see this is where you can directly talk to Gemini CLI. And on the bottom left, right, we have the Gemini 2.15 as default model. Let's continue by play around with all those commands. So first command you can try is just /help so that you can see all the related helper function, helper command. I'm gonna open it so you can see all the related command you can try with Gemini CLI. And next, we have this. If you want to directly type some shell command, you can just having this format. So Io, can you explain more about this shell mode in Gemini CLI?
Yeah, so shell mode, as you just said, it pretty much bypasses the Gemini CLI agent altogether, and it's pretty much just like running a traditional shell command. So let's say you just want to do an echo or an ls or cd into a folder, just add the exclamation mark in front of your command, and then you can run it, and it's going to run just like the same way it would if you were outside of Gemini CLI.
So it's like echo or like cat or anything, right?
Yeah.
Great. And next,
and if you want, and also it's important to mention if you want to escape out of shell command mode, just press escape.
Yeah, just escape to disable. So I just press escape, and now you can see this is in Gemini CLI mode again. And next, let's take a look at all the existing tools. Like Gemini CLI, even though it's like things in the terminal, is actually an agent itself. And this agent using you can choose different model as a brain, and you can connect to the tools. And those tools is the way that you're connecting to the external world and connecting to the server. And then so that agent use a model and using model going to do the reasoning and using the tools to answer the question for you. And let's take a look at what are the existing built-in tools from Gemini CLI. And I just paste tools, and here we can see Gemini CLI has existing tools, activate skills. So Io, what is your favorite tools with Gemini CLI?
Great question. So I like the Google search tool. It's a really good way of injecting real-time and real-world information, into your local context. But but also the most, sometimes you don't have to be so, razzle dazzle. The read file, read folder are so kind of crucial to most workflows that I have, where it's like being able to read a folder locally or read a file. So I like all the tools, to be honest, but Google search is my favorite. But what about you?
Yeah, I like Google search. Of course, it's so powerful. And also read file is very cool because you can access the related local file to add more context to your prompt. But we're going to explore all of them soon. And also remember this activate skill tool because we're going to activate the tool skill later on using this tool. And we're going to using read file tool to read the related file. And we also have some tools to modify the memory, which we're going to know soon about, what is the memory and more. And next step is we want to explore what are existing extension. So let's take a look at, this extension page, what is the difference between Gemini CLI extension versus Gemini CLI tools? So Io, why don't you give us an explanation on, what is Gemini CLI extension and why it's helpful for Gemini CLI to have such thing?
Yeah, so Gemini extensions is almost, think of it as a package manager for Gemini CLI. You could use it in a very streamlined fashion to connect with MCP servers, to connect with context files, to connect with skills and hooks, and directly integrate it with your environment. There's a more manual approach, which we're actually going to learn later today, where you kind of manually modify what we call a settings.json if you want to connect with the MCP server remotely or locally. But Gemini extensions is a more kind of robust kind of package manager for doing that. So we're going to learn both approaches. Sometimes it is necessary to kind of do kind of a manual integration with a local MCP server or remote MCP server, especially if it's not an existing extension. But most of the time, and more, we have more and more extensions being built by developers, where for most of the things that you're trying to build, you're often going to find it as an existing extension. And then these commands are really simple to run. Extensions install, extensions uninstall, and then you're off to the races. Did you really show the Gemini extensions kind of front page where someone can kind of find different extensions that exist? So browse extensions at the top. So we have the GitHub page. We also have its own web page for finding different extensions. So you can see we have extensions for Google Maps, extensions for Google Workspace. So as I mentioned before, more and more, as more developers are building on Gemini CLI, a lot of the times, a lot of the extensions that you're looking for can be found. But sometimes not, and sometimes then you have to kind of do more of the settings.json approach. But we're going to kind of cover both of these approaches later on.
Yeah, I think Gemini CLI extension is so powerful because, imagine you have this context file or you create a skill. And then if you have a skill yourself, you can only use it for your own Gemini CLI, for your own agent. But if you create it in a GitHub repo and make an extension, all the other people who are using Gemini CLI can install your extension and use your skill, use the context file, use the MCP server you created. This makes it so powerful, especially in this Gemini CLI community, right?
Yep.
And okay, let's continue. Let's take a look at our existing extension and just copy and paste. So you can see we currently only have one Vertex extension. And next, let's see what are existing skills. We talked about skills before in our slide, but we haven't explained detail what is skills and how is that different from tools. Because I got this question a lot. People ask me, what is the real difference between skills and tools? So what's your thought on what do you think it's what do you think it's agent skills and what is the difference between skills and tools?
Yeah, I would say the way I kind of look at it is skills is kind of like dynamic context, whereas tools would be more like dynamic API or database integration. So sometimes you may want your agent to be able to interact with a real-time server, whether it be API database. A tool would be your best approach, but sometimes you want your agent to have more contextual information that's more relevant to the particular query in mind. And that was when a skill would be more relevant, where essentially knowing what skill to call at the right time, because you don't want to bloat the context of the agent. So how can you make sure that you only give the agent the context that it needs at the right time? That's what skills kind of addresses.
Yeah, you want a lazy load. So in Gemini CLI, it's lazy loading the skill, so it doesn't consume the context window. And also, I think you point out a great difference, the difference between the tools and skills. That tools can be the server, it can be database, it can be a custom function, it can be API, it can be anything. But it's for example, it's a database. You have to for example, Cloud SQL database. It's a real database thing, and then skill is only how it's a good dictionary to explain how you can better interact with this database, right? So it cannot replace the database itself. But you also what you mentioned about dynamic loading is really cool thing for skills. And thanks for explaining. And next is our memory. So the memory here is basically the coming back to the slide, we have this Gemini.md file. So this Gemini.md, everything in this Gemini.md file, it's basically our memory over here. So when we say memory show, we basically just want to show that MD file. And let's take a look at what are the existing. So let's take a look at what are the existing memory over here. So when we show, so you can see that we already have some existing MD file over here to help us creating our project. And next is if I'm using memory add. So what does it do behind the scene is it's using the memory tool to loading this context to our Gemini.md file, so that every time it's when we are answering the question, it will using this as a context and better give you the result. So IO, from my understanding, the difference between the memory and skill is that you always have this memory like Gemini.md file in your context, but for the skill, it's only loading when we need, right?
Exactly. Yes, and that's a good way of phrasing it, where the memory is more of like a kind of system instruction for the agent that's always kind of loaded, whereas like you said, the skills are lazily loaded, which is a lot more efficient overall. Yeah.
Yeah. So now you can see I remember this, and then if you show it again, you will see it. So we can show this again to verify this. But it's a lot of it. I wouldn't just go through line by line. And next is let's try to adding this. We basically remember this shell mode. We just basically run this echo, and we want to save this to mission.md file. And then we want to add using add so that we can read this file and explain the content. And this is like behind the scene, it's using the read file tool to understanding the file content. And that's why I think this read file is also a very powerful tool, because oftentimes, I'm not sure about you, IO, like for me, when I ask Gemini questions for my coding, I think it's very important to give it the right file, give it the right context. And then this we will add this specific file that's really helpful for my troubleshooting case. Not sure about you.
Oh yeah, oftentimes when I'm whether it be Gemini CLI or Antigravity, the way I kind of often start with debugging is find relevant documentation, add it to my local folder, and have Gemini read the file, and kind of get more contextual information. To that point, we do now have like what we call like a knowledge MCP server that you can actually use as an extension. But oftentimes it's if you want to be a little bit more manual, you can kind of go with the file creation approach. It works, yeah.
Yeah, this is the developer knowledge MCP server that I mentioned.
Yeah, and the developer knowledge MCP server has essentially direct embedded knowledge of all our documentation on the Google Cloud side, as well as AI developer documentation. So rather than you having to kind of always pull documentation pages out and manually loading it, this knowledge server is really good for just general knowledge that you can kind of give to your agents. Yeah,
this is really helpful. I want to give it a try. All right, so next is let's explain this to see whether our file can Gemini can explain the content as it.
And if it's working, we should see it called the read file tool, right?
Yeah, but let's see. Sometimes it takes longer. Yeah. So it says the file is not found. Maybe I'll try to do it again.
Yeah, I'd probably just and worst case scenario, what you can do is you can do like a shell mode.
I can try to see cat. This is. Oh, okay. I cannot. Okay. No.
It looks like
file.
maybe did we forget to run the command?
Maybe I did run this, but I will try running this again just to.
I think I see what happened. I think we ran it, but it didn't go into shell mode. So the model thinks it called it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I will just rerun this again to making sure it's successfully creating this. So maybe I'll just now this is in the shell mode. Maybe I'll just directly run the echo so that.
Yeah.
It's working. What do you think?
Yeah. So now you can do the cat one more time, and we should see the file.
Yeah. Great. So let's try this. Yeah. You can see the file. And let's explaining this. So I'll exit the mode and I'll just explain this. Yeah, it's using the read many file tool, right? Read file. So it's currently reading this mission MD file. And it's able to explain this file to me. Super cool. And what's next? Next is we need to vibe coding stuff. Finally. And let's take a look at this diagram to see how we're gonna vibe coding our workshop, our project. Okay, so this is what we're gonna learn. So we're gonna first using Gemini CLI to create this profile web page, and then we're gonna connect this MCP server tool so that we have our local GitHub running, and that we can use our Gemini CLI to control the issue, push the code, create a repo, and more. So we play around with MCP server with Gemini CLI, and then we're gonna learn our extension in Gemini CLI so that we can create image with Nano Banana picture. With Nano Banana model to create a cool picture. And we will go to each of them for this section. And let's get started by creating our project first, creating our website project first. To get started, I'll just clear my window and just copy this so that basically I'm just opening a new Gemini. So I remember that, every time we open Gemini CLI window, basically we are opening a new session, right? So basically in this session, model only have context and history of this conversation history in this session. It doesn't have access to different session. And the more you have in this context, it consumes more context window. It has more context, but at the same time, it may not be very accurate to the end. Right. So I remember me oftentimes I like to when I realize that I have too many things in one session, I will try to summarizing what's going on in this session, and then I will open a new Gemini session so that I can have everything start from a clean state.
Yeah. I do something similar where oftentimes where I try to end off on a previous session, either with some sort of summary solution plan, like you mentioned, or kind of a summary of the general conversation that the next version can kind of kick off with. But the nice thing about the Gemini CLI as well, whereas if you want to resume off a previous session, so let's say you really like the previous context and you want to continue with it, you can actually just resume by providing that session ID.
Yeah. Just so when we create this, we can see the session ID, and then just simply using resume session ID to resume the conversation. I'm gonna just opening a new session. Sometimes if it takes a long, maybe you need to refresh the window because we are in a cloud shell environment, but looks like now we still have this working. That's great. And let's continue create our first website. So I just copy this prompt and paste in the terminal over here. So the prompt you copy is we want to create a personal website for this hero called Shadowblade. And this is a design style. It has to be dark, futurist theme. And then all the code must be separate index. So we want to create this index.html file and also style.css file. And this is the prompt we give it to Gemini to ask it to create to create a website. And later on, we want to see what does a website look like. Let's see. And now you can see that I need to grant permission to allow the change. But I remember that with YOLO mode, you do not have to grant permission every time, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. YOLO mode is really great for quick development where, let's say, you're working with non-critical files, and you don't really mind if more adjustments get made than anticipated. It's a good way of kind of not having to kind of manually accept all changes. But again, for production, we always recommend having a human in the loop. So even though it's a little bit painful sometimes, kind of actually viewing all the changes and accepting is the best way to kind of be safe with these kind of, AI outputs. Yeah.
Yeah. And the next is we want to exit it and then trying to run the server so that we can load in the website. So just do Control C and I'll clear the window.
And now pretty much all we're doing with this command is essentially running a Python invocation of a local server based off of that index HTML file that was just created. So yeah. So,
Yeah, so
no, go ahead. Sorry.
no, please.
No, I was gonna say so that it's not running at the port, so you can kind of access it in different ways.
Yeah, so we can either click the link or we can just do web view, change port, and type 8000, and then just click change and preview. Because previously I already opened it, and you can see this is a Shadowblade website. And your website may look different from mine because again, AI, you cannot control the result, right? So you may have a different website, but it probably similar style because we are adding the control to the style.
Yeah.
What's wrong with this website?
Okay, everything looks pretty solid. I like the what do you call those badges for the core skills? I think that's a nice CSS touch. But right now we're missing the profile image. So we have a nice hero profile, but no image for our hero. So we have to go ahead and create that.
Yeah, but before we create that, remember, for our development lifecycle, you want to create issue so that and then you want to work on it to resolve the issue, right? So next is we want to connecting our GitHub MCP server to Gemini CLI so that you can using Gemini CLI directly control our local GitHub version, like local GitHub server to control, like creating the issue, create a repo, push the change, and more. But in real case, you probably need to connect to a real GitHub. But in this collab, we're just using GitHub for easily access. Because for the real GitHub connection, you need to authenticate with the keys, and that's a little bit more work. But let's explain what is MCP server and how to connect that to Gemini CLI. What is MCP server?
So MCP server is a great question. It's running model context protocol, and essentially it is a protocol, the model context protocol, that essentially universalizes the communication language between agents and tools. So pretty much all we're doing, as you just mentioned, is Gitia is like an open source source control repository. We're going to be using that as a tool. So how can you create a repository, create issues, create branches? How can you expose those as tools for our Gemini CLI agent so it can actually do SDLC, software development lifecycle control, on our profile website that we just created. So essentially, we're going to be learning how can we create that Gitia MCP server, provide access to our Gemini CLI agent, and then allow that agent to then do SDLC, software development lifecycle.
Yeah, this is so powerful because, we can integrate AI in every stage of our development, everything from issue control and code submission, and then like code review. And later on, we're going to talk about CI/CD with testing and deployment and more in next episode. So come back to next episode.
Yeah. To that point,
please.
And as Andy mentioned, so what we're doing here is kind of like a lab-based version, that's kind of optimized for the lab. In production, you might be using GitHub or another kind of, remote, code repository. And we have a code reviewer extension that's actually perfect for reviewing code. It creates a PR for you, things like that. So take a look at that. So just wanted to kind of do a call out.
Yeah. All right, so next step is let's first set up our GitHub, and then, so this command is set up our GitHub, and then we want to connect our GitHub to Gemini CLI. So here, how to connect that is through our Gemini/settings.json file. We want to have that server running, and then we want to add that server to settings.json file so that Gemini CLI can access this MCP server. IO nowadays, my vibe coding things either with Gemini CLI or anti-gravity. Oftentimes, if I want to push change to GitHub, or want to create a branch to the version control, or want to pull the things or more, I really like just ask AI to do things for me. Because, oftentimes, when you're using Gemini CLI, I usually connect to the real GitHub server so that I do not have to type anything. I just simply tell Gemini CLI, push the code, and it will use the tools because it's connecting to the real GitHub server and have the tools to push the change, and it will do it for me. It's so easy in a way that, early before this vibe coding thing, I'm nervous about GitHub because in my university life, I have bad experience with I didn't manage good branch, and then many people work on the same thing, and then I'm kind of scared of having issue.
I completely understand. With Git, there's so many Git rebase, Git merge, Git. There's a lot of and so I completely agree. One thing I like about vibe coding is that you don't have to really worry about that. You just say, create a new repository for me, fork this branch, and essentially translates it for you. So I would say it's beneficial to know those commands. So it's shout out to the old school software engineers that know all those commands, but it's definitely helpful to have vibe coding tools that makes that whole process easier.
Yeah, but I do think it's good to still know the command, because sometimes it's still faster to just directly type git add, git commit, git push, right? But some people sometimes just got lazy, or you don't want to deal with the merging, run control, and then I kind of rely on AI to do it. Great. So now we set up the Git here, and what's next is we want to put this MCP server to our Gemini settings .json file. So before we do it, you can take a look at our current Gemini settings.json. We don't have this file, so that we want to put this first MCP server to Gemini settings.json, so that now we have these tools. So just put this here. Yeah, all right. You can see that we have our settings.json file containing our tool right now. It has Git here as MCP server. And I remember that later on when we do the Gemini CLI hooks, we're also going to use this settings.json file, right?
Exactly, yes. Our settings.json file for Gemini CLI is essentially your one-stop shop for providing custom MCP connections. There's a lot of other things you can do from an authentication standpoint as well. And as you mentioned, you can kind of specify your hooks integration as well. So it's a kind of a file that you often go to when you're kind of customizing MCP connections, hooks, and so on.
Yeah, if you wonder what is Gemini CLI hook, making sure you go to the next episode. And let's continue to verify our MCP server. So I just copy and paste it here. Now, if it's not loading things, I'm going to refresh the page. Sometimes it's lose connection if you're here for a very long time. Okay, so yeah, I'm back to Gemini CLI. And I'm going to check my MCP server by /MCP. And here you can see that we have our Git ready. And Git has this many tools that we can use to, creating the issue, creating the repo, and more. So next is let's create our repository called Shadowblade profile. So I just tell Gemini CLI that create this repository for me. And then without, do any git command or do anything on our GitHub, and we're supposed to see our repository created for me. I'm going to allow all server tool for this. It says the repository has been successfully created, and let's verify this. Oh, before we begin verify, I think I need to go to this website first to verify. So I need to go through this to 33005. So just the web preview 305, change and preview. And over here, I need to sign in with dev name as dev and the password also dev. So now you can see I signed in this Git here. And now let's take a look at repository. It's created for me. And yeah, great. So we have this Shadowblade profile created for me in this local MCP, local GitHub server. Great. And next, what's next? IO.
Yeah, so now that we've created the Shadowblade repository, now let's actually go ahead and push the index HTML and style CSS files that were created. So essentially, how can we manage the lifecycle of these files? First, we want a version. It's all about version control. So let's first push these versions of the files that we have now, and then we're going to go ahead and integrate the Gemini Nano Banana extension. So then when it actually modifies the file with the profile image afterwards, we can have two versions kind of version controlled in Gitia.
Yeah, let's try it. So I'm just copy this and paste over here. Just basically tell it to push the index.html and styles.css file to our repository. Okay, it says successfully pushed to repository. Let's verify them. I'm going to refresh this page. Yay, it's successfully pushed over here. So next, remember this web page that we don't have image, right? So I want to file issue to say that, oh, I'm missing this image, right? So I'm going to just tell Gemini CLI that, can you create an issue that is missing the image? So I just say file and issue for me in this repo, and this issue says the image is missing. So just copy this. Behind the scene, it's using the file issue tools so that you can create that issue. It says it's already been filed. Let's take a look.
Nice.
See, the image is missing and it's writing the description. And next, we want to eventually create our image with Nano Banana model. So using Nano Banana, so here we are using Gemini CLI extension, like I explained it earlier that this is what is Gemini CLI extension. And here we are connecting an extension that's connecting our Nano Banana model. Why don't you explain a bit of what is Nano Banana model and what are the difference between different Nano Banana models?
Oh yeah, so Nano Banana is a text to image generation model that's extremely high touch and high fidelity. So you can use it to generate images of different resolution from 4K to 2K to 1080. Different aspect ratios, so portrait, landscape, square, and so on. And what really makes this model stand out is how well it actually adheres to your text prompt. If you look at many leaderboards, such as El Marina, Nano Banana is found at the very top for things like text to image translation, as well as image editing. So overall, we're going to be leveraging this model behind the scenes to actually create our profile image and replace it with the current placeholder that's in our website.
So now let's take a look at how to create that image with Gemini CLI extension. So I'm still in this Gemini CLI page. I want to quit that, and then just first I want to enable our service and then I want to create an API key so that eventually I can enable this Gemini CLI extension with the right API key. So let's get started by first enable the API.
And such use how we're enabling the APIs because when you're calling the Gemini models, there are really two ways where you can kind of authenticate against them by either using Vertex authentication or API key. When you're using the Nano Banana extension with Gemini CLI, it expects API key. So essentially, we're going to be going ahead and creating that Gemini API key that we can use specifically for the Nano Banana extension.
Yeah, so I will just open this new page and then create this API key. So now I can making sure on the top left, it's selecting your Agentverse project. It's making sure it's a right project. And what's next is you need to click this create credential and API key. You can give it a name, anything you want, but here it's better to give it a proper name. We have this generative language key over here. And then for the restriction, you can select generative language API as restriction, so that only this is the use case, and that's it. So just create, and then just making sure you access the key. We're gonna use that later on. So next, I'll go back to my terminal and let's install our extension by run the command Gemini extension install and then our extension link. So just simply typing this. And before we continue, I want to prepare my API key. So I'll just go to this API key, click show key, and copy this so that I have this key ready. And now coming back, so making sure I'm continue, and I'm gonna paste my key over here. I'm gonna continue.
And you're gonna see some interesting errors. Don't worry about that because we're using it in Cloud Shell. Like the GUI that would usually spin up for this is not kind of accessible. So, but all you really want to look out for is the extension Nano Banana installed successfully at the very bottom. The other warnings you can ignore.
Yeah. So now you install this extension, we can give it a try. Before we try, we want to run this command. So I want to explain what are this config file we are trying to run over here.
Yeah, so great question. So when you're using Cloud Shell, it naturally directs all AI requests through Vertex AI by default. As mentioned before, when you're calling Gemini models, there's kind of two ways you can authenticate, through Vertex authentication or API key. Since the extension requires API key, essentially all we're doing here is saying that for the Nano Banana extension, we're going to be using API key. So that's pretty much all we're saying here. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks for explaining. And now just copy this and paste it over here.
But if you're not in Cloud Shell, this command would not be necessary. But since we are in Cloud Shell, it's just one thing that we're adding.
Cool. And now we just have this MCP server without even touching our setting.json file. Okay, so Io, you mentioned that without touching the setting.json file. I'm curious, is it supposed to say anything about extension in the setting.json file?
Great question. No. So your custom MCP configurations and your custom hook configurations, amongst other things, you'll find in your settings.json file. If you want to find the extensions that are available and active in your environment, there's a separate command for that, extensions list. So you can run that directly in the Gemini CLI.
Okay. Let's run it. So first, run this command to open a new Gemini CLI session. And then in the session, I'm gonna just like I mentioned, I want to check existing extension to see whether Nano Banana is loading here. So just type extension list. And now you can see we have Nano Bananas over here at the extension. Yes. Yay! So it's activated and up to date. So next, I want to in the Gemini CLI, I want to have the command to say generate portrait of shadow blade with style. So basically, I want to create a profile picture. So let's just copy this generate portrait first, and then so that we want this to generate the image, and then modify this empty index.html file to add this image to the profile picture. So we want to generate a picture first, and then adding this to the web page. I'm gonna copy this, making sure I have this ready, and I already have this generate command over here, and waiting for the image to be generated. I'm gonna say allow our server tool for this session.
So you can see behind the scenes, it's calling the generate image tool from the Nano Banana MCP server. And yeah, generated the image.
Only the one tool, I guess. Yeah, so here, if you're curious, we want to see the image, we can open the folder and try to take a look at the image. It's at a table and an output, and let's take a look. What does the image look like? Wow.
Oh,
It's pretty cool. Wow. So now we want to modify the website and then update this image to the website. Okay, just copy this and paste it over here. So I was hoping that this website finally have that image showing up over here.
So now we're essentially telling it to modify the index. Okay.
Yeah, so again, I'll just modify. Oh, I think I choose the wrong thing. I somehow select the wrong thing, so I will just
maybe escape.
no.
Yeah,
Okay, a lot. Great.
Yeah.
It's adding this one line to adding this Nano Banana output image for this profile picture. Hopefully that fixed the website.
Yep.
Yay! It's general.
Yeah.
It's updating the HTML. Let's take a look. Okay, so maybe I need to restart. Maybe I'll just rerun that. I'll just rerun this Python file to okay, Python. I'll rerun this command to configure this. All right. Wow. It's pretty cool. Do you see that?
Nice, and it the aspect ratio can maybe be a little bit better, but I love the placement of the image and knew exactly what to do, and it looks great.
Yay! Great. And next, since we already have this image created, we want to close the issue in our GitHub, local Git here. So I want to tell Gemini file the issue. Oh, okay, it's not this one. Okay, I want to push the code and close the issue. So basically it's using the push tool and also close the issue tool to updating things. So I'm opening the Gemini. All right, and I'll just paste this. And I want Gemini to push this change for me and update the issue. So I was hoping to see the issue closed on this site. And also I want to see the code updated over here. So now I say allow all server tool for this session. All right, nice. It says it has successfully pushed and issue has been closed. Let's take a look. I'll refresh the page. Wow, it says this code has been pushed and with this issue closed. Great. Looks like everything, it's just AI just do everything for me. Great. So we just finished this step 5 and just do a quick recap of what we did in this one. So we learned how to using Gemini CLI in a smarter way so that master the art of vibe coding by not only just give a Gemini CLI prompt, but understanding how to add MCP server using external tools to manage to using Gemini in our all development lifecycle, right? So here we learn how to do it with GitHub through the MCP server. We also learn how to using Nano Banana to create an image. And we also play a bit of, we also understanding what is Gemini CLI extension. And we also play a bit of project level, understand the project level context and the user level context. So Ayo, do you know what's next? What are we going to cover in next episode?
Great question. So in next episode, we're going to learn how can we configure things such as agent skills. How can we configure your Gemini MD file for contextual information being provided to the Gemini CLI agent? How could we integrate hooks into your workflow with the Gemini CLI agent? And how can we then deploy an agent that's being created by the Gemini CLI agent to Cloud Run so we can then have our boss fight at the end? So we have a few things covered. Also, we're going to be learning CI/CD, agent evaluation. How do you monitor your agent for performance? So stay tuned. But until next time, yeah, Amayo.
I'm Annie. See you next time. Bye.
Yeah, see you. Bye.